Good afternoon, everyone. There is a hurricane coming, Hurricane Ian, coming up the Gulf Coast, and it's going to hit Florida. But before we get started on the forecast, don't forget to subscribe. I've got so much fun planned. And while we're waiting on Hillsborough County to issue an evacuation order, let's get to the forecast. This hurricane, they're saying, is going to be as bad or even worse than Katrina. So I've heard. I have no idea. It might play out before it gets to Florida. It may stall and be a Category 1 when it hits Florida. We don't know yet, but always be prepared. Wednesday, it's expected to hit Tampa at 140 mile an hour winds as a Category 4. Thursday, Category 2, 105, and then Friday, 65 miles per hour as it goes up through Tallahassee and into Georgia and the Carolinas. The governor has declared a state of emergency for Tropical Storm Ian, or now Hurricane Ian, to all 67 counties in Florida. I encourage all Floridians to continue to monitor the storm and listen to local officials, he says. So I'd recommend stocking up on plenty of food and water this week, because it does look like it's about to intensify. That's that beautiful GOES-S image from the GOES-S weather satellite.
Coming to you from Houston, Texas, with a look at your tropical update for Hurricane Ian for Monday, September 26th, 2022. As of the 10 a.m. Central Time update, we're talking about an 80 mile per hour Category 1 hurricane, a big difference from where we were this weekend. If you've been following along the last few days, the storm already looks a lot healthier. We've got healthier statistics, and this thing has already started to rapidly intensify. A few things I want to point out on satellite before we move on. Notice the curly Q here of that white shading towards the center of circulation. That indicates the most intense thunderstorm development, and that's starting to wrap around that center of circulation, which says to me, I don't think we're far off from seeing a further intensification and also an eye clearing out in the middle of this storm. Typically, you need all of this to wrap fully around that center of circulation to get the sinking air in between all those thunderstorms, and that's where you get that eye development. I think we'll get that probably within the next 6 hours. Another thing I want to point out, the symmetry of this storm. Notice we're looking at almost a perfectly circular satellite representation. The better the symmetry, the healthier the system. Imagine if it was lopsided to one side, that would indicate the presence of wind shear, which typically holds back a storm from intensifying. We don't have that right now. There's no wind shear, there's no dry air in place. We've got plenty of warm water. This thing is about to really take off as we go at least the next 12 to 18 hours. In fact, in the last 18 hours alone, we've already seen explosive development. We've already met the criteria for rapid intensification. You may have heard that phrase over the last few days. What do we need to get to that point? A 35 mile per hour wind jump in 24 hours. We had a 35 mile per hour wind jump between 4 p.m. Central Time yesterday and 10 a.m. Central Time today. Do the math. That's 18 hours. So we did it in less time than we needed to get to that point. So that's the path that we're on with Hurricane Ian as it makes its approach to Cuba and eventually the United States. We do not see any slowdown in intensification expected.
Wow.
In fact, we expect this trend of rapid intensification to continue. We're expecting it to go from a Category 1 storm right now to a Cat 4 by Tuesday and Wednesday, with winds sustained at 140 miles per hour. This thing will keep intensifying here as we go through at least the next 24 to 36 hours, even after interacting with the west coast of Cuba. And then from there, its sights are set on the west coast of Florida. So let's get to the latest track, the latest forecast, the official forecast from the National Hurricane Center. Expecting, again, that major Category 3 hurricane landfall west coast of Cuba. From there, it emerges in the southern Gulf of Mexico as a Category 4 hurricane passing about 150 miles to the west of the lower Keys. So we've got tropical storm warnings in effect for Key West. The reason why it's a tropical storm warning and not a hurricane warning is because we don't expect the hurricane force winds to extend that far out from the center at this point. That could change. We'll have to keep an eye on that forecast. But we do have hurricane watches in effect for the Tampa Bay area. Tropical storm watches just to the south of that. The exact landfall position is still not fully known, but we are starting to narrow that cone. So we're starting to get a better idea of where the placement for this storm will be. Anywhere from southwest Florida, potentially up to the Panhandle, the Big Bend coast. And the reason for that has to do with a trough of low pressure to the north that's going to interact with the storm. It's going to slow its motion down. Notice from Wednesday to Thursday morning, the storm is not moving much. Only from Fort Myers to Tampa. That's like a 2-hour drive on the highway. It's going to take 24 hours for this storm to go that distance. So we really start to see a slowing down in the motion as it approaches the Florida West Coast, which means more impacts for the folks there in the Tampa Bay area especially. So again, hurricane watch is in effect. For us here in Houston, New Orleans, the Western Gulf, this is not going to be an impact for us. This really is going to hone in on Florida. So let's take our two most reliable forecast models. The American, that's going to be in yellow. The European computer model, that's going to be in red. We'll start the clock, and then we'll stop it right there. Wednesday. As we get into the middle part of the week, look at the agreement between these two models. The tighter these lines are together, and the closer they are in latitude, indicating the same timing, the higher the forecast confidence goes, because it means there's not a lot of disagreement in the forecast simulations for where this could go. Now again, this is only two computer models. We have a ton others that we look at, but these are the two that we're most familiar with. And they are in good agreement. They were in disagreement over the weekend, but they have really come in line with each other. But remember how I said that the storm could be slowing down on approach to the west coast of Florida? Look at that. We kind of see that little bit of meandering here. Notice where the lines, instead of being that straight shot to the north, they start to squiggle here. That's where we start to see that slowing. The timing on that slowdown is going to be Wednesday into Thursday, and that could mean prolonged impacts for southwest Florida up to the Tampa Bay area with persistent onshore flow, persistent rainfall, and storm surge. Storm surge is going to be the biggest issue with this storm as it passes the west coast of Florida. So here we go. Let's time it out with Future Track. And this is just one computer model simulation. This is different from the American model. This is different than the European. This is more of a high resolution look at what the radar could look like as we get into Tuesday morning. So overnight tonight into Tuesday morning, either a high-end Cat 2 storm or a Cat 3 hurricane as it approaches the west coast of Cuba, the western half of Cuba. The eye wall moves right over the island of Youth, right over the west end of the island, and then from there merges into the Gulf of Mexico. Key West, this is going to be a close call for you. We're talking about, again, maybe about 150 miles. Storm surge could be upwards of 6 feet in that area. But notice, by Tuesday evening, we are already starting to see these rain bands lift into southwest Florida. So from places like Naples and Marco Island, all the way up towards Fort Myers, Port Charlotte. This is bringing back memories for you of Hurricane Charlie from the early 2000s. A similar setup here in terms of path and potentially in terms of storm surge as this storm really starts to ramp up here. I do think this is going to be a much bigger storm, though, than Charlie was. If you remember, that storm is very compact. But also look what starts to happen here. We're not looking at a compact circle anymore. We're looking at a storm that starts to extend far north. And that is the influence of some wind shear on the storm. So we're at a Cat 4 storm at this point. We continue to play this out, and now we're getting into Wednesday morning. So Wednesday morning, a healthy-looking storm. There could be some wind shear on the north end of the storm, but so far the Hurricane Center does not expect that to impact the intensity. That impact won't come in on intensity probably until Thursday as it gets farther north into the Gulf of Mexico. But by this point, persistent onshore flow into Fort Myers, into Charlotte Harbor, and then also into Tampa Bay. Because remember, the wind around this storm is going in that direction.
They're expecting a storm surge into Tampa Bay. They're expecting a storm surge a couple of miles inland in Tampa Bay. This is the first I've heard of this with a Category 4 hurricane hitting Tampa. And it hadn't hit Tampa in a while. They're expecting all the water to go inland, and it'll be even worse. All this area along Tampa Bay will be flooded as this hurricane makes its way up the Florida west coast. Let's look at this beautiful GOES-S satellite image again. Right now it's on the coast of Cuba, making its way upward with a hurricane warning in Tampa. Evacuations in some counties are in progress right now. Right now it's a sunny day in Tampa. I'm going to try my best to keep everybody updated on this channel, so don't forget to subscribe. If you've enjoyed watching, give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back later with another update.